In his lifetime, Galen wrote over 250 books, and because he was writing at the centre of the powerful Roman Empire, his ideas spread. But today, only about half the writings have survived, and they are copies of copies of copies. Galen wrote Greek, but some of his books survive today only in translations, in Arabic, Hebrew or Latin. This is partly because after Galen's death, the Roman Empire became less and less powerful. In 410 AD, Rome was sacked. The Romans no longer ruled Western Europe, and their civilization fell apart. This meant that medical study was badly affected. There were fewer libraries and schools. Transport was not safe, so scholars didn't travel. Fewer people had the money and time to study. A very important consequence was the separation of the Latin and Greek languages. The eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire gradually split apart. Greeks no longer understood Latin, and Romans no longer understood Greek. So many Greek medical ideas were not studied in the West. The Greek language, Galen's language, survived in the East. When the Arabs conquered the eastern part of the old Roman Empire, Arabic scholars discovered Greek books and translated them into Arabic. From 832 to 900 AD, hundreds of Greek writings on medicine and science were translated into Arabic. Western scholars wouldn't be able to read these books for another 200 years. In the West, Christianity was also encouraging medical study. Monte Cassino was a monastery in southern Italy, which was gathering together one of the finest medical libraries in Europe. The work of the translators here was important in bringing Galen's ideas to the West. One of the translators was Constantine the African, a Muslim who later converted to Christianity.
Early in my life, it seems many years ago now, I was a merchant. I was a Muslim. I was a merchant. I traveled. And I came to Salerno in Italy for the first time. I had some interest in medicine, always. I had some skill. I could tell measles from smallpox. I had set up my stall, and I was talking to a doctor from the monastery nearby, when I asked him, out of curiosity, did they have many books on medicine in Latin? Well, he said they did not. I did not speak Latin at this stage, but it seemed to me here was a great emptiness where there should have been learning. So anyway, my travels continued to Egypt, to India, to Persia, and my studies continued. And I read many works of Greek, which had been translated into Arabic, which was my language. And 3 years later, with these books, I came again to Italy. It was a fearful crossing. There was a storm. I lost some. But at last I arrived, a Muslim still, at the gates of the great monastery of Monte Cassino. In my bag, a work of Galen, the great philosopher, and others besides. And they welcomed me. They had heard of my scholarship. And I became a Christian and wore Christian clothing. And I set to work, learning Latin, and then translating into Latin works on fevers, and on the stomach, and on the eyes. For 10 years now I have continued, and I hope for my great effort, I will have earned some reward for my soul.
Between 1070 and 1087, Constantine translated many texts from Arabic into Latin. Latin was the language used by Western scholars, and so the works of Galen and others could be understood by doctors here for the first time. Before this, only a fraction of the ancient medical writings were known in the West. In the 12th century, more and more of Galen's work was translated by those who came after Constantine. One of the few pictures we have of Constantine is this woodcut, made 400 years after he died, but its existence shows how important his work was to later scholars. It shows Constantine sitting around a table with two other figures symbolising the coming together of Arabic, Jewish and Christian medicine. The Christian Church, like the Muslims earlier, liked Galen's ideas. They fitted with their own beliefs that God created man in his own image and that the human body was the best possible design. The Christian Church preserved Galen's ideas and passed them on to the new universities that sprang up in Paris, Bologna and Oxford. Without these translations, Galen would just have been a name and few people would have read his work. Because of Islam and Christianity, Galen's ideas continued to affect medicine in many ways, 1,000 years after his death.